My wife smiled and said, "Don't worry, Mom will take care of her." I came home early. My 4-year-old daughter was locked, alone in a dark garage. My mother-in-law said, "She needs to learn." I said nothing. 48 hours later, they were both crying. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Out on the water, a man learns to trust his instruments over his feelings. A gauge does not lie to you. A gauge does not smile and tell you everything is fine while the pressure builds up behind a seal that is 1 minute from letting go. People do that. Beau had spent 14 years learning to read the instruments and never the people, and he forgot, for a long and costly while, that a person can hold your eyes and tell you a calm, easy lie, while the worst thing you can imagine is happening 20 feet away, on the other side of a kitchen door. His name was Beau, and he worked offshore out of Houma, Louisiana. 2 weeks on a rig out in the Gulf, 2 weeks home, and around again, year after year. A crane operator by trade and a good one. The man they trusted to swing 40,000 pounds of pipe over the heads of a working crew in a rolling sea and set it down soft as a sleeping baby. It is precise, dangerous, patient work, and it had made Beau a precise, patient man, and it paid well. That last part matters more than any of the rest of it, because in the end, everything his wife and her mother did, every cruel and lazy and calculated thing, they did for the money Beau hauled up out of that water. And he had been so proud of being the man who provided it that he had let himself go blind to what they were doing with it, and with his daughter in the long 2-week stretches while he was gone. His daughter was named May, and she was 4 years old. She had her mother's dark curls and a laugh that could carry clear across the equipment yard when Beau brought her by on a day off. A big, open laugh that turned the heads of hard men and made every one of them grin. When Beau was offshore, out on the rig in the middle of the black Gulf night, he would lie in his rack and count the days left on his knuckles, back and forth, the way his grandmother used to count a rosary. 14 days. He got 2 weeks at home out of every 4, and he had made himself a promise that he would give that little girl every single hour of them, and he had kept it, and he had believed that made him a good father. He knows now that a good father does not just fill the 2 weeks he is home. A good father finds out what happens in the 2 weeks he is not. Beau had never once made himself find out. That is the thing he will carry. His wife was Lacey, and standing behind Lacey, always, in every decision and every scheme, was her mother, Wanda Boudreau, who had moved into Beau's house 3 years earlier to help with May while Beau was on the rig, and who had never, in all that time, found a reason to leave. Beau will be plain about the two of them now because the softness he showed them for years is the thing that nearly cost him his child, and he is done being soft about it. Lacey and Wanda did not work. They did not want to work, had constructed their whole lives around the not working of it, and they loved exactly one thing on this earth with any real and lasting devotion, and it was the direct deposit that landed in the account every 2 weeks with Beau name attached to it. He had believed for years that he had a family waiting for him on shore. What he actually had, he came to understand, was 2 grown women waiting on a paycheck and 1 small girl caught in the middle of them, doing the work the 2 women would not do, and being punished for being too little to do it well. He should say a word about how it got that way, because a man does not wake up one day married to a stranger. It was gradual, the way the dangerous things always are. In the early years, Lacey had been warm, or a good enough imitation of it that Beau, who had grown up short on warmth and did not have a fine instrument for measuring it, had not known the difference. Then May came, and Wanda came to help, and the 2 of them together were a different weather system than either one alone. The phone calls to the rig got shorter. The warmth got thinner and more conditional, present when there was something to be gained and absent otherwise, and Beau, out on the water and lonely and grateful for any softness at all, told himself it was the strain of distance and kept sending the money home. He knows now that the money was the only thing they were ever really waiting on, that the softness had been a tool the whole time, applied when the tool was needed. But a man on a rig at 3 in the morning, counting knuckles, does not want to believe that the family he is breaking his body for is a business arrangement he is losing. So he did not believe it. That refusal is the second thing Beau carries, right beside the first. People who have never done it do not understand what offshore work takes out of a man, or why he keeps doing it. You live on a steel island in the middle of nothing. You work 12-hour tours in heat and salt and noise, and you sleep in a rack stacked 3 high in a room with strangers, and the whole time the only thing keeping you steady is the picture in your head of what you were doing it for. For 14 years, Beau's picture had been simple, and it had been enough. A little girl with dark curls, a house he was paying off, a life on shore that was solid because he made it solid. He had let that picture do all his believing for him. He had never held it up against the truth, because out there, 200 miles from anyone who loved him, the picture was the only warm thing he had, and a cold man does not test the one warm thing he owns. His hitch got cut short by weather. There was a storm churning up out in the Gulf, one of the big slow ones that shuts down the whole field, and the company flew half the crew in a full 2 days early rather than ride it out. Beau did not call ahead. He thought about it, standing in the crew change line at the heliport with his bag over his shoulder, and he decided against it because he wanted to surprise May. He wanted to come through the door 2 days sooner than she expected and see her face do the thing it did, the whole body run at his legs, the laugh. He drove home from the dock with the windows down thinking about that laugh. He came through his own front door into a quiet house. Lacey was on the couch with her phone in her hand. Wanda was somewhere back in the kitchen. He could hear her moving around, and Lacey looked up at him, and there was a half-second before her face arranged itself, a half-second he would think about for a long time afterward. And then she smiled, that easy, warm smile he had married, and she said, before he had asked a single thing, before he had even fully set down his bag, "May's fine, don't worry, Mom's got her handled." Something in how fast she said it put a cold hand flat on the back of Beau's neck. 14 years of reading instruments teaches a man to notice when a needle jumps before the load has even been applied. She had answered a question he had not asked yet. People only do that when they have been rehearsing the answer. "Where is she?" Beau said. And it was Wanda who answered him, from the kitchen, not turning around from whatever she was doing at the counter, in a flat, bored voice like a woman reading items off a grocery list. "She's out in the garage. She needs to learn." Beau crossed the kitchen. He remembers it in pieces, the way you remember the seconds around an accident on the rig. He put his hand on the door that led off the kitchen to the garage, and he opened it, and he reached for the light switch, and he flipped it, and nothing happened. The bulb had been taken out of the socket. He would find it later, sitting on a shelf, unscrewed and set aside deliberately, and that small fact, the deliberateness of it, is a thing he still cannot think about without his hands wanting to close. In the gray half-light coming through one dirty window high up on the wall, on the cold, bare concrete floor of Beau Fontenot's own garage, his 4-year-old daughter was sitting against the far wall. Her knees were pulled up tight to her chest, and her arms were wrapped around them, and she was so still, so quiet, that for one terrible second his heart stopped entirely. Then the door opened wider, and the light changed, and May flinched. She flinched away from the light, from the movement, pressing herself back against the wall, making herself smaller. And then she saw that it was her daddy, and she made a sound that Beau Fontenot will hear on the day he dies. It was not a scream. It was not even really crying. It was a small, broken sound of relief, the sound of something that had stopped believing anyone was coming and had just been proven wrong. She had not called out. That was the thing that split Beau clean down the middle, standing in that doorway. She had been in that dark garage long enough times, to have learned all the way down in her small body that calling out did not bring anybody. So she had stopped calling out. A 4-year-old had learned to sit silent in the dark and wait, because waiting was all that had ever worked. Here is the thing Beau Fontenot did next, and it is the single most important decision he has ever made in his life, and he made it in about 4 seconds, standing in that doorway with his daughter's face turned up to his in the gray light. He said nothing. Every cell in his body, every ounce of 14 years of hard muscle and harder temper, wanted to turn around and walk back into that kitchen and tear the whole house down to the studs around those 2 women. He wanted it the way a drowning man wants air. And he has never in his life been more grateful for the one thing his work had drilled into him deeper than any other, deeper than the skill and the strength, which is this: the man who panics on the rig is the man who gets somebody killed. You do not react to the emergency. You secure the load first. You get the vulnerable thing to safety before you deal with the cause of the danger, always, every time, no exceptions, because the cause will still be there in 5 minutes and the vulnerable thing might not be. And the load, the only thing in that entire house that mattered a damn to Beau Fontenot, was the little girl on the concrete floor. So he did not say one word. He walked to her slowly so as not to frighten her worse, and he crouched down and he gathered her up, and he felt, holding her, how light she had gotten, lighter than a 4-year-old should be. And that told him more than the garage did, because it told him this was not one bad afternoon. He carried her back through the kitchen. He walked past Wanda, who had turned around now and was watching him with a wary, defiant look but did not say anything, because even Wanda Boudreaux could read something in his silence that told her to be quiet. He walked past Lacey, who had stood up off the couch, and Lacey said, in a coaxing, dismissive voice, "Beau, come on, don't make a whole thing out of it. She was being difficult today. Mom was just—" Beau did not answer her. He did not look at her. He has thought about that a great deal since, and he believes it was the silence, more than anything he could have shouted, that first told those two women the ground was moving under them. They were built for a fight. They knew how to cry and accuse and turn things around and wear a man down. They did not know what to do with a man who simply would not speak. On the way through the hall, he grabbed the gray rabbit off her bed, the one-eared stuffed rabbit she slept with, because a man who has been offshore 14 years knows you never leave port without the one thing that lets your people sleep, and he wanted her to have it wherever she landed tonight. She took it and pressed her face into it in the truck, and that small automatic gesture, the way she reached for comfort before she reached for words, told Beau she was still in there, still as May, still reachable, and he held onto that the way he held onto the wheel. He put May's shoes on her in the front hall, kneeling on the floor, and he carried her out to his truck, and he buckled her into her car seat and checked the strap twice, the way he checked every rigging connection twice, and then a third time because his hands were not quite steady. On the drive across town, she did not talk. She watched the streetlights go by with the rabbit under her chin, and about a mile from his mother she said, very small, into the rabbit, "Are you going back offshore?" And Beau said, "No, baby. Not for a long, long time. Maybe never." And she was quiet a moment, and then she said, "Okay," in a way that broke him worse than crying would have, because it was the relief of a child who had learned that the times she was left were the times it got bad. He drove the rest of the way with his jaw set and both hands on the wheel and made himself a promise about the word offshore that he has kept to this day. And he drove his daughter across town to his mother's house, to Cecile Fontenot, who took one look at the two of them standing on her porch and asked not a single question and simply opened the door and opened her arms. His mother fed May at the kitchen table, and Beau stood in the doorway and watched his daughter eat, and that was when the second thing hit him, harder in its way than the garage. May ate too fast. She ate with one arm curved around the plate, hunched over it, glancing up between bites the way you eat when the food might be taken from you. A 4-year-old at her own grandmother's table, eating like a stray. And when Cecile set a second helping down without being asked, May looked up at her, wide-eyed, and said in a small, careful voice, "Am I allowed? Am I allowed?" Cecile Fontenot, who had buried a husband and raised 3 children and did not cry easily, had to turn around and busy herself at the stove for a moment. And Beau understood, watching it, that the garage was only the part with a door on it. The rest of it had no door. The rest of it was in how his daughter ate, and how she flinched, and how she'd learned not to call out. That was the moment the last of Beau's softness toward those 2 women burned off and did not come back. And then, once May was full and bathed and finally asleep in the spare room with the hall light on and the door open a hand's width because she would not have it closed, Beau went back out and sat in his mother's driveway in his truck, alone, in the dark, and he did the thing he was truly good at, the thing the water had taught him. He stopped feeling. He closed the valve on all of it, the rage and the horror and the guilt, and he set it aside to deal with later, on his own time, and he began coldly and carefully and completely to plan, because Lacey and Wanda had made one enormous mistake, and they did not even know they had made it. They believed that a man who was gone 2 weeks out of every 4 had no say in his own house and no eyes in it either. They believed his absence was their kingdom. They had one afternoon of Beau Fontenot not being home, and they had used it to lock his daughter in the dark. Beau was about to give them 48 hours of himself being very, very present. The first thing they had forgotten was the cameras. Beau installed cameras in every house he had ever lived in, and he did it for a simple reason. A man who spends half his life 200 miles offshore on a steel platform in the middle of the Gulf likes to be able to look at his phone at 3 in the morning and see that his family is all right. He had put them up himself, one careful weekend, running the wires clean and neat the way he did everything. There was one on the front door and one on the back. And there was one in the garage, up in the high corner by the shelving, because that was where he kept his tools, and good tools have a way of walking off, and it recorded quietly and continuously to a cloud service on Beau's account. His account, tied to his phone, his email, his password. Lacey had known about the doorbell camera and had long ago stopped thinking about it. The one in the garage she had forgotten entirely, if she had ever really registered it at all, because Lacey did not go into the garage. The garage, it turned out, was for other people. Beau sat at his mother's kitchen table that first night, long after May had finally fallen asleep in the spare room with the hall light on and the door open, and he opened his laptop, and he logged into the camera service, and he made himself watch. He will not describe here everything that was on it. He watched enough of it that first night to understand the whole shape of the thing, and then he made himself stop watching and start working, because watching was going to break him and working was going to save his daughter, and he only had room for one of those. He learned later, when the investigators canvassed the street, that he had not been the only one who could have known. A neighbor 2 doors down had heard a child crying in that garage more than once and had told herself it wasn't her business. Another had seen May hauling trash cans to the curb, a 4-year-old dragging a can twice her size, and had thought it odd and thought nothing more. That is the quiet horror underneath the loud one. And Beau has made his peace with only part of it. That a child can be disappearing in plain sight, on an ordinary street, in an ordinary house, and the world will look right at it and find a reason to look away. He does not entirely blame the neighbors. He knows he was the one who was supposed to see, and he was 200 miles out on the water believing a picture. But he thinks about those neighbors sometimes, and he has become, since, a man who does not look away from a crying child, ever, whosever child it is. It was not one afternoon. That was the first thing the footage told him. And it was the thing that ended any small mercy he might ever have felt toward those 2 women. The dark garage was not a single lost temper on a bad day. It was a routine. He found it again and again, going back through the weeks he had been offshore, his own 2-week hitches laid out on the screen like a calendar of it. A 4-year-old marched to that door and put inside and left, the light off, the door shut, to learn. And in the ordinary daylight footage, the rest of it, the thing that ran underneath the punishments, his little girl carrying a laundry basket that was bigger than her whole body, staggering with it, while 2 grown women sat. May fetching, cleaning, hauling, doing the work of a housekeeper at 4 years old, and being scolded when she was too small to do it right, and marched to that garage door when she cried about it. 2 women who would not lift a finger for themselves, living in ease on Beau's paycheck, and using his daughter as the unpaid help, and locking her in the dark when the unpaid help was too little to keep up. Beau did not smash the laptop, though he wanted to. He did the cold, useful thing instead. He downloaded all of it. Every relevant clip, dated and time-stamped, saved to the laptop, and then backed up to 2 more places, because a man who rigs loads for a living does not trust a single point of failure with anything that matters. It took him most of the night. 14 years of learning not to panic. And he spent every last bit of it at that kitchen table, building the case 1 clip at a time, while his hands shook and his coffee went cold and his mother sat up with him in the next room without a word, the way his mother had always loved people, in a straight-back silence louder than talk. The second thing they had forgotten was whose money it actually was. They loved his paycheck. They had built their entire lazy, comfortable kingdom directly on top of it. And in 3 years of spending it, neither Lacey nor Wanda had ever once stopped to consider the one simple fact that Beau, sitting in his mother's kitchen at dawn, was now looking at very clearly. A river you do not own can be shut off at the source, in a single morning, by the man who does own it. He did not sleep at all that first night, and he did not need to. There is a clarity that comes to a certain kind of man on the far side of the worst thing, a cold, clean tailwind, and Beau rode it. By the time the sky went gray over his mother's yard, he had the whole operation laid out in his head the way he'd lay out a lift plan, every step in order, every point of failure identified, nothing left to chance. Get the child safe. Done. She was asleep down the hall. Preserve the evidence. Done. Backed up 3 times. Cut the enemy supply. Next. Retain counsel. After that, file everything at once, so it all lands on the same day, so they have no time to react, No time to hide a thing or get their story straight. He wrote it out on the back of an envelope from his mother's mail pile, numbered, and then he made coffee and waited for the bank to open, and he was calmer than he had been in years, because for the first time in a long time he was not believing a picture. He was reading the instruments, and the instruments told him exactly what to do. He was at the bank when the doors opened. Lacey was not on the main account. Beau had kept the direct deposit and the savings in his own name, not out of any suspicion at the time, just out of the careful, separate habits of a man who'd grown up with nothing and didn't fully trust money to stay. He had never examined that habit until the morning it saved his life and his daughter's. He moved the money into an account only he could touch. He canceled the 2 cards Lacey carried on his account, and then he sat down with a banker and went methodically down the list of every automatic payment that kept Wanda Boudreaux's entire existence afloat, all the little help that had quietly become her whole income. The note on her car, her phone, her insurance, the monthly transfer that had started as a favor and calcified into an entitlement. He stopped every single one of them. One morning, one meeting, and the 2 women who had never worked a day for any of it discovered that the ground they stood on had always, the entire time, been standing on him. There was one more thing that morning, small, that Beau has never quite been able to put down. When he went back to the house once, with a sheriff's deputy standing by, to collect some of May's things, he found food hidden in her room. A dinner roll gone hard, a handful of crackers, a juice box, tucked up under the corner of her mattress and behind her books. His 4-year-old had been hoarding food, squirreling it away in secret, the way a child does when meals have stopped being something she can count on. Beau stood in that small bedroom holding a stale dinner roll his daughter had hidden in her own house, and it told him more than the garage footage had, more than the doctor would, because a child does not hide food from people who feed her. He put the hidden food in a bag, dated it, and gave it to Amy, because even that, she said, was evidence, and Beau had stopped being surprised by what counted as evidence in a house like the one he'd been sending his paycheck to. Then Beau took May to a pediatrician, a kind and careful woman he'd found through his mother, and the doctor examined his daughter gently and thoroughly and wrote everything down in a medical chart in flat clinical language. The weight she'd lost off her own growth curve, the old marks and the newer ones, the way she flinched, the way she guarded herself, the way a 4-year-old should never have learned to hold her own body. A doctor's chart, Beau knew, is not the bitter word of an angry husband. It is evidence, dated and signed by a professional with nothing to gain. And then, on the afternoon of that first day, Beau Fontenot walked into the office of a lawyer named Amy Guidry, a small, sharp, unhurried woman who had handled the hard divorces in that parish for 20 years and had long since stopped being impressed by anyone. He set his laptop on her desk and opened the footage, and he set the pediatrician's report down beside it. And he said nothing, because he had found that saying nothing had become his whole strength. Amy Guidry watched about 90 seconds of a 4-year-old girl sitting alone in a dark garage, and then she reached over and paused it, and she took off her reading glasses, and she looked at Beau for a long moment. "Mr. Fontenot," she said, "I want to be very clear with you, because I can see you're carrying this like it might be a hard fight, and it isn't. This is not a custody battle. This is a criminal case that happens to have a custody case attached to it, and you are going to win the custody by a country mile. What I need from you is discipline, and I can already see you have it." She tapped the edge of the laptop. "Do not go back to that house. Do not say one word to your wife or her mother. Do not warn them. Do not negotiate. Do not give them the chance to get careful or to get their story straight. Let me file all of it at once, and let them find out the way they made that baby find things out." She held his eyes. Alone, in the dark, and too late to do anything about it. Beau went home to his mother's house, and he did exactly what she said, which was nothing, and it was the hardest and most disciplined thing he had ever done, harder than any lift in any storm. His mother carried the part of it he could not. While Beau handled the banks and the lawyer and the cold machinery of it, Cecile Fontenot handled May, and she did it the way she did everything, without fuss and without stopping. She cooked all day, because feeding people was how Cecile loved them, and slowly, meal by meal, she taught a 4-year-old that food was not something you had to earn or hide. She sat on the floor and played, because May, it turned out, did not really know how to play, had never been simply allowed to, and Cecile had all the patience in the world and nowhere else she needed to be. And at night, when May woke crying, It was often Cecile who got there first, an old woman padding down the hall in her slippers. And Beau would hear her low voice through the wall, singing the same soft Cajun lullabies she'd sung to him 40 years before, and he would lie in the dark and understand that his daughter was, for the first time in a long time, in a house where the grown-ups were on her side. A man cannot rebuild a child alone, no matter how hard he strikes at the people who broke her. It takes a grandmother who knows what a grandmother is for. Beau had married into two women who had forgotten. He was lucky, luckier than he deserved, that he'd been raised by one who never had. They found out on the second day. It came apart for them in pieces, over the course of a single day, the way a badly rigged load comes apart, all at once and from every direction. Lacey called Beau's phone the first time when a card declined at the grocery store, and then again, 40 times over the course of that day, each call more frantic than the last. Wanda called when the bank told her the automatic payment on her car had bounced, and then again when her phone service warned her it was about to be cut off. And somewhere in the middle of that long, unraveling day, a process server walked up to the front door of Beau's house and handed Lacey a thick envelope. And inside that envelope was a petition for divorce, and a filing for emergency sole custody of May, and a temporary protective order. And the papers laid it all out in plain, cold, legal language. That her husband had years of camera footage she had forgotten existed. That the house she stood in was his separate property from before the marriage and had never been hers. That a pediatrician had documented the child's condition, and that the money she had built her entire life upon was gone, moved beyond her reach, and was never, ever coming back. Beau did not answer a single one of the calls. Amy had told him not to, and he did not need the telling. But he heard later, from a cousin of his who lived nearby and had gone to the house that day, what those 48 hours had looked like from inside. They cried, both of them, the whole day. Lacey, who had stood in that living room 2 days before and smiled and told him not to worry, cried into the phone that he was destroying their family, that he was a monster, that he could not do this to her, that she was his wife. Wanda, who had said in her flat grocery list voice that a 4-year-old needed to learn, cried that she was an old woman with nothing, that he was leaving her with nothing. The two women who had put a small child alone into a dark garage to teach her a lesson spent 48 hours learning one of their own, and the lesson was this: that everything they had, every dollar and every comfort and every hour of the easy, work-free life they had built and defended and felt entitled to, had belonged, the entire time, to the quiet man they had never once thought to take seriously. And that quiet man had picked all of it up and carried it out the door, calmly, in 2 days, the same way he had picked up his daughter and carried her out of the dark. It had taken them one afternoon to unscrew a light bulb and lock a 4-year-old in a dark garage. It took Beau Fontenot 48 hours to turn off every single light those two women had ever lived by. The divorce and custody hearing came before a family court judge with a long reputation for patience and a much shorter one for tolerating people who lied to her face. Lacey walked into that courtroom confident. Beau saw at the moment she came in, the set of her shoulders, the small private certainty, and it told him she still did not understand, even then, what was about to happen to her. She had a lawyer, and she had a story, and she had a soft blue dress and her hair pulled back plain and no jewelry, the costume of a wronged and modest woman. And the story was one Beau had heard taking shape for years without ever recognizing what it was being built toward. That he was a cold and absent man who had chosen a paycheck out on the water over his own wife and child. That Lacey was a devoted and exhausted mother who had raised their daughter single-handedly through his long absences. And that the money he had so suddenly cut off was not a father protecting his child, but a controlling, vindictive husband trying to punish and starve the woman who had dared to stand up to him. She cried at the correct moments. In the gallery behind her, Wanda cried too, dabbing at her eyes. A matched set. They had always been a matched set, those two, and they cried on cue in that courtroom exactly the way they had cried at home for years to get their way, to wear people down, to turn every situation until they were the victims of it. And Beau will admit that for the first half hour of that hearing, in that quiet wood-paneled room, he watched the old machine working, and he felt the current in the room beginning to run their way, the way it always had. Lacey's own lawyer walked her through it carefully. Yes, Beau worked away from home for long stretches. Yes, She had shouldered the raising of May largely alone. Yes, she had recently found herself suddenly cut off from all household money without warning, frightened, unable to buy groceries, which she framed as the cruelty of a controlling man rather than what it was. She was good. She had answers ready for the questions she expected, and she delivered them with the exact measured tremble that had worked on Beau himself for years. Beau sat with his hands folded on the table and his face still and let her build it, brick by brick, as high as she wanted to go, because Amy had told him the taller the tower she built on a lie, the further it had to fall. There was one bad moment. Lacey's lawyer, pressing the point, asked the court to consider that the child's fear and thinness could just as easily be the mark of a father with a temper who was gone so often no one really knew what happened on his week's home. Beau felt the room tilt toward it. It is an easy story to sell, the absent man with the hidden temper, and for a few seconds he watched two people in the gallery decide it might be true. He kept his hands folded. He had learned at last that the answer to a lie is never a louder voice. It is a document with a date on it. Then Amy Guidry stood up. She was not loud. She was never loud. And she was in absolutely no hurry at all, and she asked the court's permission to show a brief video, and the permission was granted. It played on a screen mounted at the front of the courtroom, where every person in that room could see it. A dark garage, a timestamp running in the corner, a 4-year-old girl sitting against a bare concrete wall, knees pulled up to her chest, arms wrapped around them, so still, flinching at nothing, too quiet. And then the daylight clips that Amy had chosen with a surgeon's care. The same little girl staggering under a laundry basket bigger than she was, while two grown women sat comfortably nearby, and one of them rose, unhurried, to take the child by the arm and march her toward that garage door. The courtroom went silent in a way that Beau had only ever felt in one other place in his life, which is out on the open water in the flat. Wrong calm that comes just before real weather arrives. Lacey's tears stopped. The soft blue dress did not matter anymore, and neither did the plain hair, and neither did one word of the careful story the two of them had spent years building. There is no performance a human being can give that survives the sight of that child on that concrete floor, played large on a screen, with the date and the time burned into the corner where no one can argue with it. Amy let the silence do its work before she said another word. Then she entered the pediatrician's report into evidence, dated, clinical, and undeniable. The lost weight, the marks, the growth fallen off its own curve, and she read the doctor's plain conclusion aloud into a room where no one was breathing. She entered the bag of food that a 4-year-old had hidden under her own mattress, and she explained, quietly, to a courtroom that already understood, what it means when a child hoards food in a house where 2 adults are provided for. She laid out the financial records, not to prove greed exactly, but to answer the story Lacey's lawyer had told. Here is what the household actually ran on. Here is whose name was on every account. Here is the man who paid for all of it and the 2 women who worked for none of it and called the child lazy. And then she did the one thing that finished it completely, which was to call Wanda Boudreau to the stand and simply let her talk. Because Wanda, like her daughter, was constitutionally incapable of imagining a room she ought to keep quiet in. Asked, evenly, to explain the garage, Wanda lifted her chin, and something proud and hard came up in her face, and she said, "A child has to learn discipline. That is how I raised mine, and they turn out just fine, thank you." Nobody today wants to hear it, but a little dark and a little quiet never hurt a child. I will not stand here and apologize for teaching that girl a lesson somebody clearly needed to teach her. Beau watched the judge pick up her pen and write something down and draw a line under it, twice, and he knew then, the way he knew a lift was going to hold before he ever took the strain, that it was over, all of it in their favor. The rest was consequence. And after everything, after the years of not seeing and the days of not sleeping, it was something to sit still and watch it finally land the other way. Beau got his daughter, sole legal and sole physical custody of May, with Lacey cut down to the narrow, supervised edges of the child's life, contingent on things Beau suspected she would never do, and Wanda barred from any contact with the girl at all. The house stayed Beau's, because it had always been Beau's, bought and paid for before Lacey ever entered his life. Lacey had walked into that courtroom demanding the house, a share of his pension, and permanent spousal support. She walked out with a denied claim on every count, a prenup that held like a good weld, and a bill of her own, because custody going to Beau meant that the woman who had tried to make him pay her now owed child support for the daughter she had allowed to be locked in the dark. Beau made himself stay for the reading of the custody order, and he watched Lacey's face while the judge spoke, and he did not feel the triumph he had thought he might. He felt something closer to grief, for the years, for the picture he had believed, for the fact that the person he had married had turned out never to have really been there at all. Lacey looked back at him once, across that courtroom, and mouthed something he chose not to read, and he looked away first, not out of cruelty, but because there was simply nothing left in her worth looking at, and he had a daughter waiting at his mother's house who was worth everything. And it did not end at the divorce, because it could not, because some things the law does not let a person walk away from. The footage and the pediatrician's report went where such things go, to the district attorney, and the district attorney was a parent, and the district attorney did not look away. Wanda Boudreau was charged and convicted of child abuse and child endangerment, multiple counts, one for nearly every dated clip on Beau's cameras, and she was sent to prison, an old woman now, which is exactly where a person belongs who does that to a small child and then stands up in a courtroom under oath and demands an apology for being asked about it. And Lacey went too. Child endangerment, and more, for building her whole comfortable, work-free life on a scheme she knew full well meant her own daughter would be hurt and frightened and used to keep it running, and for standing in that living room and smiling at her husband and telling him not to worry while his little girl sat alone in the dark 20 feet away. Beau has thought about which of them got the worse end, and he has decided it does not matter, and he does not care, but he notices it anyway. Wanda will be an old woman when she comes out, if she comes out with nothing and no one. Lacey is younger, and will have years on the far side of her sentence. Years to live in a town that knows exactly what she is, in a parish where the story of the little girl and the dark garage traveled faster than any lie she ever told. Years to understand that the money she loved and the comfort she would not work for and the daughter she used as a tool are all equally gone, and that she traded a good man and a good life for a cell and a name no one will say kindly again. The two women who had only ever loved Beau Fontenot's money ended with none of it, and a cell apiece, and no one left to blame but each other, which Beau imagines they are still doing, and will do for a long time. He did not go to either sentencing. People asked him if he wanted to be there, to see it, and he found that he did not. There was nothing in that room he needed. Everything he needed was 6 years old and learning, slowly, that the dark was not coming back. May is 6 years old now. She lives with her father. Beau came off the rigs the month the custody was finalized. He took a crane job at the port, onshore, that keeps him home in his own bed every single night. And it is less money in a smaller life, and he has not missed the water for one single day, because he found out the hard way what his absences had cost, and he is never going to be an absent man again. His mother, Cecile, is with him most days, and May has learned, finally at 6, what a grandmother is actually supposed to be. The flinch is gone now. It took a long time. For the whole first year, May would not go anywhere near the garage, would not even walk past the door to it, and Beau understood exactly why, and he never once made her, and he never once mentioned it. And then, one Saturday, quietly, he moved a workbench into that garage, and he set a small stool beside his own, and he asked May if she wanted to come help her daddy fix the lawnmower, no pressure, only if she wanted. She stood in the kitchen doorway a long time, looking at that room, and then she came, and she climbed up on the little stool, and she handed him wrenches, one at a time, very serious about it, her tongue caught between her teeth. That garage is the brightest, loudest room in the house now. The door stays open. The light stays on, a strong new bulb that Beau checks every few days the way he used to check a gauge, because that little girl is never again, as long as he draws breath, going to sit alone in the dark in her own home wondering whether anyone is coming. She eats slow now, too. That took even longer than the garage. For a long time, she still hunched over her plate and ate too fast and asked every single meal, "Am I allowed?" And every single time Beau said the same thing, gently, no matter how many hundreds of times it took. Always. You never have to ask. There is always more, and it is always yours. And one ordinary Tuesday, a year or so in, he set her dinner down and she just started eating, easy and slow, chattering about her day, not asking, not hunched, not guarding the plate, and Beau had to get up and go stand at the sink with his back to the table for a minute because a father remembers the small mountains even when they look from the outside like nothing at all. His mother, sitting at that table, caught his eye and gave him a small nod, and neither of them said a word, because in the Fontenot family the biggest things have always been said in the quietest ways. May asked him once, not long ago, why she doesn't see her mama or her grandma Wanda anymore. She is old enough now to notice the shape of the absence. Beau thought a long time about how to answer a thing like that to a 6-year-old, and in the end he told her a version of the truth cut down to a size she could hold. Some grown-ups, he said, were supposed to take care of you, and they didn't, and they hurt you instead. And when a grown-up does that, they don't get to be around you anymore. That's not your fault. That's the rule, and it's a good rule, and it's my job to make sure it holds. She thought about that, serious as she was about everything, and then she nodded and asked if they could have pancakes, and that was the end of it, and Beau counted it a mercy that at 6 she could set it down that easily. He knows the questions will come back, older and harder, and he will answer those too, when they do, all the way and true, because he is done being a man who lets a picture do his believing for him. Out on the water, Beau Fontenot learned to trust the instruments over the feelings, and it made him excellent at his job, and it made him blind in his own house, because he had trusted a smile that was reading empty the entire time, a needle sitting on 0 while he told himself the tank was full. He does not make that mistake anymore. He watches now what people do to the ones who cannot fight back and cannot tell. That is the only gauge that has ever told him the truth about a person, and it never once lies. People hear this story, and they want to know how a man stays that calm, how he walks past the 2 women who did it and says nothing, how he does not put his fist through a wall. And the truth is not that Beau Fontenot is a calm man. The truth is that he learned, 40 feet up in a swinging cab over a rolling sea, that calm is not a feeling. Calm is a decision you make with your hands when the feeling would get someone killed. He made that decision in a doorway, looking at his daughter on a concrete floor, and it is the best decision he has ever made, and he would make it again 1,000 times, because the loud version of that afternoon does not end with his little girl safe. It ends with him in a cell and her back in the dark. He chose her over the satisfaction of his own rage in 4 seconds, and everything good in both their lives came out of those 4 seconds. They had one afternoon with his daughter in the dark. She has the whole rest of her life in the light, and Beau made sure of the turning of it in 48 hours. And he will keep making sure of it. One open door, and one burning bulb, and one slow, unhurried, unguarded meal at a time, for every single day he is left to give her.